Hello and welcome to the Womb Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Shanti here with me today. Thank you so much for joining us, Shanti. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Someone, a mutual friend of ours, I guess it was, called Shanti's attention to my request for speakers who can share with us about the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and how that an awareness of these elements and working with these elements can support our womb wellness journey. So, Shanti enthusiastically volunteered to come on and share with us about this. So, Shanti, I'd love for you to introduce yourself more and how you've learned about the four elements and womb wellness, and um, and how that has influenced your own womb centered healing journey and that of people that you support.
Well, thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to be here and to speak to you and to everyone about the journey and about womb wellness. Hi, everyone. My name is Ifatinuwe Shanti Pravna. I began this journey, I would probably say somewhere about maybe 6 years ago. Um, I have I've had the honor of learning under African and indigenous elders, everything from not just herbal and medicinal property, the actual modality of womb steaming and other womb related practices to help stimulate the womb and to really kind of allow women the ability and the possibility of keeping their womb. And especially since now we have seen an increase of hysterectomies happening across the nation and women struggling with infertility, that we wanted to, I particularly also wanted to tap into uh, that knowledge, not just to help others, but for myself as well as I get older. But my journey really started, I think, just like most of anyone else. It was really a personal journey. I had developed some skin issues that really just wouldn't go away. And it was in I even went to Western medicine, had a biopsy, and they couldn't even figure. And it was just like this inflated rash, more or less, that just kind of like consumed my back and my chest into my belly. And at the same time, I started noticing also that my cycle would be consistent for like maybe 3 months and then be inconsistent. And I started developing cyst, which is also, it's also known as Bartholomew cyst along the outer area of vaginal, my vagina, more or less. And so, with that being said, I wanted to find a way to really heal myself. And unfortunately, nothing was really working. But I was very strong on, I didn't want to use anything that had, that was related to steroid or, any steroids or any really prescription type drugs. Um, just it didn't feel really comfortable for me. And so I began this journey, and it really started off with my first certification in womb steaming. And that was under the Yoni Steam Institute, which is led by one of my elders, Iyanifa Ifatoke Oshalande Ajala. And through her, I was able to not only spiritually connect, but also understand the beauty that it is to re-own our wombs and how to heal our wombs if we took the time to really understand our wombs. And then that just kind of like propelled me to go even further, because I am one of those types of individuals that once I open up the box, I go down the rabbit hole.
Right. So I'm really curious about this initial training uh, and certification for yoni steaming. Um, what what were some of the things that you learned, not only about steaming, but perhaps even about lifestyle, and how were the four elements involved in that initial training? Did you learn about the four elements in that training, or did that come later? Yeah, tell us about that.
So the integration with the elements really came much later. I think I've always understood the elements as far as on an energetic level. But the course really did somewhat introduced it, but I don't even think that they were that the teacher was even knowledgeable how far she was going with it. Because during the certification, we weren't just using, obviously with steam you're using water and you're using earth with the herbs, but then she also introduced smoking, womb smoking, which is something that is not really practiced or advertised. And then at the same time, it wasn't just about healing a woman, but also healing men and seeing and understanding that men too have a womb, just differently, but they have a womb as well, an area of creation. So in that aspect, that's where I guess I would say physically it was introduced.
Mhm.
But on the energetic level, I've always understood and have had the understanding of it. And it was much more later down the road through other elders, particularly my indigenous elders, that I really started learning the elements and the importance of earth, air, water, and fire by understanding and really understanding the constitution of a person's body. And this is where we began, or more or less, I began to understand that the body is really divided between the maternal and the paternal and the maternal lineage. And understanding that, we also look at the factor of like where are the positioning of certain organs. And if you think about it, in Vedic and Chinese medicine, that's vital to understand whether or not someone is having too much fire, because certain organs are a fiery organ, and then understanding also whether or not is the element related or connected to a water organ, and are they having too much water or too little water. So in understanding that, I then began to really incorporate that into my practice, that when someone comes to me and tells me I am suffering from endometriosis or endometriosis, I not only look at, okay, here's what medically that looks like, it's all in the room, but also understanding and then beginning to ask questions. What other discomforts are you feeling? What other elements are you seeing that are not properly functioning? Because again, the womb is not just the hormonal balances in our womb are not just there, they are affected by other organs that we have, such as the digestive system, our kidneys, our liver, our thyroid. So, understanding that as well, and understanding that if they're not functioning properly, and if they're overactive or underactive, that can play a major part on how the woman's womb is functioning, and even her cycle and her day to day just bodily function. And so that's where those kind of understandings kind of like bridge together for me. So it was really much more when I started working with my indigenous elders, also with other teachers that are in the homeopathic uh, sphere, that I really began to understand more on a physical level the importance of understanding earth, air, water, fire. And then on a spiritual level, it only began to make that much more sense and kind of coming into a fold. Because when you understand where the trauma and where the dysfunction, correct, let me correct myself. When you can understand where the dysfunction is occurring, you can then understand where the trauma is connected to. Is it connected to the lineage of the mother, or is it connected to the lineage of the father? And then it might not be necessarily that they have a disconnect or an estranged relationship directly with the father or directly with the mother, but it could be something that is intergenerational, something inherited by the mother lineage of something that has been inflicted many, many years ago. And while she may not have that, he or she may not have that issue with their current mother, they might be seeing that by the relationships they are engaging with other people in society, be it at work, be it in their partnerships, be it in their friendships. And so that's where the energetics of understanding how these elements are so vital and important, because again, it's about releasing the emotion and allowing it to surface, but then at the same time, not just dwelling on it, but actually processing through it so that we can live a better life.
Now, given what you described as far as how your ailments were presenting themselves, a skin rash and
Hmm.
cysts and things like this, those tend to be things that can take a while to resolve. With
Hmm.
I'm imagining, and I'd love to hear your story about it. But I'm imagining that there were layers of deepening your awareness and deepening your personal healing process that you went through when, first learning about steaming, and perhaps that addressed it to a certain degree, and then you discovered a layer underneath that needed to be addressed, and then it follow and that led you to another elder and another line of
Hmm.
inquiry and another deepening of your studies. So could you share about how your healing process paralleled this journey of inquiry and study?
Sure, of course. So one thing that I realized and learned was that basically all the things that my physical body was releasing and showing up was my own suppression of anger.
Mm.
I had so much suppression of anger that my body literally was saying, I cannot hold it any further. And so while with the steaming and steaming myself, that began to help, it still just only addressed the physical. It wasn't really addressing the more emotional levels. And that's where I got into even a deeper relationship with my Kundalini practice and really understanding how to address my anger and process through who or what is connected to the anger. Because again, anger isn't just an emotion that we feel today and is gone tomorrow. It has its layers and it can be connected to multitudes of things. So while, and I always give this example, you can be in the road and get road rage, right? And get angry at someone cutting you off. And it's not necessarily that you're mad at the person cutting you off. There's something deeper than that. What about them cutting you off bothers you? Those are the types of questions you have to start beginning to ask yourself. How did that really make you feel? And then you start realizing, well, that made me feel like they didn't acknowledge my presence. Okay, so then now that you see that it's about acknowledgement, knowing that you are present, when or how have you ever experienced that type of scenario in your own individual life? And then you start to kind of like deciphering that, who was present, when, where, how. And then again, once you start seeing those things, you start to see the interconnection with, oh, this happened to me as a child, this happened to me again at this stage and at this stage and at this stage. So you start to see the patterns of how that road rage, as people like to say, really kind of manifested itself. And it's just because you're finally able to kind of sort of express it, although unhealthy, and although to a stranger, and not really to the individual or to the situation that actually created the foundation of that rage.
Mm.
So that's where it really began for me, was to kind of using that, but then also using the consultation and the support of my elders in understanding um just how to even work with herbs and doing my plant walks with the herbs. That really allowed me to kind of build a relationship with certain herbs to allow them to not only be a part of my steaming, right? So here I am walking with, like, for example, dandelion. Dandelion is a huge, is a beautiful flower, and most people just see it as a weed, something that is just ugly in the yard and then you just have to cut off. But what people don't realize is that the dandelion is super resilient. The dandelion, year after year, will continue to grow exactly where you just excavated it from. And that with that same power, the dandelion is a flower of sun. It is about brightness and opening up the doors and just kind of, expressing. And here I am walking with this plant, understanding how to go about my process and release anger and opening the door to understanding the many layers of anger, while at the same time, it is also helping me physically heal myself.
And so
And so,
dandelion is one that has been helpful for you specifically for
yeah.
anger. So, and that leads to the question I'm sitting over here, stewing with is, um, what is the process? And I hear that one tool is connecting with herbs like dandelion.
Mhm.
But for that anger, how, first of all, how does the dandelion help that to be resolved? Because what I'm hearing you say is that, and I'm sure listeners and myself included can
Mhm.
relate to this. Okay, yes, I'm angry at this current situation, but my anger is much bigger than what the current situation merits, right? The person cutting me
Mhm.
off on the road doesn't deserve this huge explosion of anger that I'm having. And that's because there's all this old anger from all the times that someone in my life, and perhaps even in my mother's life, and or my father's
Mhm.
life and his father's life, or her mother's or father's life, going back generations, all those times that they weren't acknowledged and respected, and um, that people cut them off
Mhm.
in one way or another, symbolically or actually physically, that never got resolved, never got. So we're looking for some kind of resolution. We're looking for some kind of release of all of that stored up old anger,
Mhm.
that's more helpful
Mhm.
and more healthy, and comes to a better place than just taking it out on whoever cut you off on the road, that doesn't really
Exactly.
get you anywhere as far as your own healing, and doesn't really release that whole backlog of anger. And so I'm curious what these teachings and these practices that you've mentioned, how they actually help to resolve that backlog of anger. Is it just a matter of releasing it? Is it a matter of finding, for me, my work with anger has been quite extensive as well. And for me, it's about, oftentimes, it's about finding the wisdom underneath the anger, and perhaps making adjustments in my day to day life by asking for my boundaries to be respected, taking responsibility, not expecting other people to know what it is that I want and need, standing up for something that I feel is right, that people aren't aware of, or that people are disregarding, and becoming an activist is another way
Mhm.
that anger becomes useful. That angry energy can become useful and have a channel to be to flow into. And I could go on and on about it, but I want to hear what you've discovered and what you've explored as to how to transmute that anger from being this pent up energy that the body is can't contain anymore, and it has to come out in a skin rash or a cyst,
Mhm.
into an actual useful healthy energy that's integrated into the healthy functioning of your body and your life.
Well, first, once I understood my body and how my body is and where my body is withholding certain elements and energies, that was the first start. So I began with healing it on the physical level as well. So I knew I had to address my liver and I knew I had to address my womb. And dandelion was just one of many that I've used as in that process. But what I also understood, and I think this is like the primary thing that people need to understand, is that it is okay to be angry. It is okay to have fear. It is okay to be in grief. What is not okay is when we either are so quick to respond to it, the extremes of extremes, or we just suppress it to the point where we just ignore it, put a smile on our face and say, everything's fine, everything is fine. That's when we know we're in trouble. So when I say it's okay to be angry and to feel anger, then I'm also saying it's okay to express anger. Whether that anger needs to be expressed physically by going outside and just screaming into the air, or putting it into something productive. Something needs to be done with the anger, but you have to acknowledge that anger lives there and that is a part of of ourselves. So what I did was pretty much that. It was not just in understanding where my anger was coming from, how to address it if it was attached to someone or a situation, a scenario, accepting that I can't rewrite the past and how things occurred, that I can only now accept it and acknowledge it, but also at the same time forgive it in a way where I can make peace with it and say that happened, but I will no longer allow it to withhold me in this state of anger.
Mhm.
And so, in making my peace with it, that allowed me to also then start to express and look for ways to kind of put it into better use. So whether it was advocating for women on, the rights to their bodies with relations to abortion. I'm a huge advocate, and I've sat on panels and boards of directors for organizations on human trafficking, you know, especially in the areas, one of the things that I struggled with was that I knew that my anger was about not being seen. And here I am at the same time working with organizations and or entities of bodies that are what I consider the group that gets unseen or dismissed, right? If you have an abortion in society, you look as, oh my God, you're dirty, you're the other. The same thing with people who are survivors of human trafficking. They're somehow kind of like, even though you're saying that they're a survivor, there's still that undertone of they're a victim and it was their fault. So I took that anger and placed it in there on that, in the sense of being an advocate, educating people, but at the same time educating others on other women who are just going through the same thing that I am. So maybe they're not survivors of one or the other, but they're just trying to survive the day to day. So in putting forward what I learned, I was able to also give back, and I'm also able to see how they're taking those that energy of anger or fear or grief, and they're able to make peace with it to the point where they are now seeing that their lives are changing, that the doors of abundance and prosperity and positivity is now becoming something that is regularly with them day to day, as opposed to something that they just wish that they had. And then at the same time, I have to put, kundalini as well as another way for me to express the anger, because holding a pose for 7-11 minutes and doing it for 40 days straight, it is very physically tasking, but it also makes you face your anger. It addresses you, it forces you in a way to really dig deep and ask yourself the questions that at times we don't feel comfortable asking, because it's very easy and it's very comfortable to say I'm angry at you, but it's very hard to point the finger back and said, what did I also do to create the situation for either a my boundaries to be disrespected and not heard, or that I just kind of I just participated in this state, in this issue of anger. So there's also that accountability, so that I had to do the same thing for myself. I had to take the accountability regardless of what at what stage it happened, because I either ignored it the first time and said, oh, well, that was just culturally, that's just how the culture is because that's how I was raised. Or it was about, you know, not really affirming, here are my boundaries, and I'm not okay with you stepping out of that boundary. And if you do, there's going to be other repercussions, whether we sever our relationship, or I just won't be in existence in the premise, in your existence, to
Mm.
whatever nature you need to go to. So it was also about being the protector for myself that I didn't do. And so through Kundalini, I was able to see that and then begin to create those barriers and begin to really vocalize, what are my boundaries? How far will I'm willing to push my boundaries for an individual, or even for myself when I really want to try something, and then respecting it at the same time, where no, those are the things that I just will not cross. Like, it's just, it is what it is, and that's it, and being okay with that, and also being okay with that other people won't accept it.
Mhm.
And I think that's hard. I think that's really, really hard, because we want to be people pleasers. We want to make sure that we're okay with everyone. But unfortunately, sometimes that's impossible. And we have to be okay with that. And that applies not just to the outside worlds, but even in our inner worlds with our family members. And I think that's really where the first steps really become, uncomfortable, but it's also very liberating at the same time.
Wonderful. Well, Shanti, I want to thank you for sharing so much. This process of coming to terms with anger is so full. It's so much. You just
Mm-hmm.
talked about all these different, a whole bunch of different angles that you've been exploring, and I relate to all of them. And I know there's more, and there's more layers of all of these angles as we recover from this collective forbiddance and suppression, especially of anger from people in female bodies,
Yes.
right? That has been forbidden for many many generations, you know, across cultures, across lineages. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's such, once we open that box and go down that rabbit hole, right, then there's just
Yeah.
this blossoming, and it's our fire, it's our creative fire, it's our passion that has been suppressed. It's our, you know, that's an important aspect of our
Mm-hmm.
creativity, of our womb center, that has been suppressed, and it's at the root of a lot of the stagnation that happens in the womb that creates some of these ailments that you've mentioned, PCOS and cysts and various things,
Mm-hmm.
endometriosis. All of those have this, you know, aspect of fire and the other elements being out of balance, too much, too little, not flowing, stagnant, held back. And that anger piece is so essential. And listeners know I've talked about it a lot on this podcast. So here we are with it again. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom around that and your journey around that. If folks wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about your work, how might they do so?
Well, they're welcome to visit my website, which is wombshanti.com. They could also email me at wombshanti@gmail. I am on social media as well. If you go to the Instagram, is just underscore wombshanti underscore. But there, yeah, everyone is welcome to reach out at any given moment in time. If you just want to have a conversation, or if you really want to explore something that's going on with you or someone else, I am open to just engaging with people. And I again thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today, to talk to you, talk to your audience, and share a little bit of the wisdom that I've acquired over the years. And I always like to stress that I'm forever a student before I am a teacher, because I love learning. I feel that every time I'm surrounded by my elders, I'm always walking away with another fruit nugget of information, and it just always makes sense to the work that I'm doing. So I thank the divine, I thank you, and I thank everyone. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Shanti. Such a blessing to have you. And listeners know that if you want to learn more about what's going on at the Womb Centered Healing Temple, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com. And I encourage you to sign up for the newsletter there. You'll get notifications when each time a new blog post or a new podcast comes out, as well as anytime there's some kind of event or course or activity that's upcoming. So thanks again. And please subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform that you're viewing or listening to it on, so that you'll be the first to know about the next one coming out. All right. Wonderful to be with you today. That's all for now. Until next time.